Here with more, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman and Texas Senator Ted Cruz is with us. First of all, thank you both for coming on together. This is not something that happens regularly on primetime television. I think this is a moment where good people of goodwill come together. Senator Fetterman, I'll start with you. I watched the interview that you had with Maria this weekend. You said a lot of powerful things. You openly took on your party and virulent anti-Semitism that has been expressed in the last couple of years. Tell us where you stand on all this.
Oh, well, for me, it's undeniable. I mean, who are we afraid to really criticize? And that's really kind of like the far left kinds of individuals that are on the college campuses and just terrorizing Jewish students and just trying to pander to parts of people in Dearborn and those kinds of places. For me, my party has to confront that as well. And now that's why I was proud to stand with Israel, especially after 10/7. And now you have and allow this kinds of things on social media or these kinds of college campuses. Now you look at, like in Australia, in Sydney, they've had 100,000 people kinds of protests going after Israel and the Jewish community. I mean, that is manifested in that horrific massacre. They can't even celebrate, one of their holidays without getting gunned down and mowed and targeted.
Yeah. Let me, Senator Cruz, it's not just anti-Semitism, because that has been happening. And I've been watching and listening to you, and you have been reminding people that this is extraordinarily dangerous. But it's also what I believe a pre-9/11 mindset that is kicked back in. I talked about this last night a little bit, and that is, well, what did the 9/11 Commission report determine? They were at war with us. We were not at war with them. What part of that did we forget, Senator?
Yeah, look, that is exactly right. Let me say at the outset, I just want to commend John Fetterman for the courage he's served. I'm proud to call John a friend. I'm proud to serve with him. But he's shown extraordinary courage calling out anti-Semitism in his own party. And he's done so at considerable cost to himself. And that courage is powerful. It's inspiring. He has stood alongside the state of Israel, and that is needed. It's something I really admire that he's been willing to do. You are right, Sean, that what we are seeing, what we saw on Bondi Beach was the latest manifestation of this evil, and this evil is spreading. This hatred of Israel, this hatred of Jews, and radical Islamic terrorism. They are at war with us. This is their objective. There's evidence that this father-son duo of murderers were affiliated with ISIS, were doing so, waging jihad. And I will tell you, as we watch the horrors of, to date, 15 people murdered in Australia in that mass shooting and over 40 people injured, we saw some radicals on the left basically sending out thoughts and prayers and saying, oh, this is terrible, what happened? And I'll tell you, my response to the radical leftists in America, mostly in the Democrat Party, is what exactly do you think globalize the Intifada means? What you have been chanting in the streets, what you have been chanting on college campuses, this is exactly the result of globalizing the Intifada. That was the objective, was to murder as many Jews as possible at this Hanukkah celebration. It is grotesque, it is evil, and it is dangerous, and we need to stand up and confront it.
Senator Fetterman, if you look at this rise of anti-Semitism, it's worldwide, and fear of standing up to it, add to that the idiocy of illegal immigration and open borders, where we're allowing people, in the case of the 4 years under Joe Biden, and I'm not asking you to criticize Biden or your party, but we had wide open borders. We had, 10, 12, we don't even know how many million people come into this country. They came in unvetted. They came from over 200 countries, including many countries that have terrorist ties. And the thing to me is it makes zero sense why we would not demand a simple background check to make sure you don't have radical associations, a health check in a post-COVID world, and maybe we have to insist that you don't become a financial burden on the American people, then go through the process legally. Welcome to America. You know, welcome, be a part of our family. Well, why are people resistant to that? Without a doubt. You know, the Biden administration did. The border was a disaster, absolutely. And you look at those graphs. You know, when you have almost 300,000 people showing up at our border, I mean, that's the size of Pittsburgh, and that's unacceptable. That's unsustainable. How can you possibly maintain those kinds of levels? And now, you know, we failed on securing our border. And I was proud to support and was the co-sponsor of the Lakin bill as well. Now, I mean, we can be very, very pro-immigration, as I am, but we need to have a secure border, and we have to do it in the appropriate kinds of way. And it's entirely reasonable to have these kinds of background and those kinds of checks and make sure who we are admitting into our nation. And now we have to, it's also reasonable to bring in people that have the kinds of values that are compatible with our values now, too. That is not about free speech. That's about bringing on the people that want to assimilate and they want to build their lives in our country, not becoming part of a destructive force in our nation. You know, Senator, you used the word assimilate. It's a powerful word because I don't think people that buy into an ideology of convert or die, that their values are compatible with our constitutional republic. I think that's a good point. Nobody seems to want to talk about that for fear of probably being called a racist. Senator Cruz, I want to ask you this because I think that the President Trump has actually found the perfect balance, and that is, and I agree with him, no forever wars. I think he's right. But that doesn't mean no military action. That doesn't mean isolationism. And the president in his first term proved it when he dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan, when he took out the ISIS caliphate, when he took out Soleimani and Baghdadi, and he really made the world a safer place. And there were people on our side of the aisle that did not want this president to take the bold move of taking out Iran's nuclear sites when they were hell-bent on getting them. And according to all the intelligence officials, sources I have, they were awfully close to getting them. And I have a hard time understanding why they don't understand the nature of this threat.
Look, you're absolutely right. The single most important foreign policy decision President Trump has made in the second term was the decision to bomb the Iranian nuclear facilities. And there was a major battle within the administration. There were loud voices within the administration that opposed bombing the Iranian nuclear facilities. And the president made the right decision. Why? Because when the Ayatollah chants death to America, I believe him. And the president as commander-in-chief has an obligation to keep the American people safe, and allowing the Ayatollah to acquire a nuclear weapon that he could use to murder thousands or even millions of Americans was an unacceptable risk. Now, President Trump campaigned and is delivering on not engaging in forever wars, not invading other countries. You know, you look, President Trump opposed the Iraq War. I opposed the Iraq War. I'm not interested in long, extended land wars. But that doesn't mean you run away from the world. Donald Trump is not an isolationist. He is willing to defend this nation. And when it comes to radical Islamic terrorism, if we don't defend ourselves, we risk another 9/11. We're seeing the pattern of what happened in Australia. Remember, just a few days earlier, we saw an Afghan jihadist that Joe Biden led into this country come to D.C. and murder one National Guardsman and severely wound another. We've seen radicals and terrorists led into this country who have attacked Jewish people throughout the country, have attacked ICE agents throughout the country, and standing up to jihadists who want to murder Americans. That is the central responsibility of the commander-in-chief, but it's also a responsibility, I think, that everyone serving in government has an obligation to protect the safety of their constituents.
The president has, given a lot of his time and energy to bring peace around the globe. And,
Yes.
we see what's happening in Europe and the Middle East, and he's working really hard to find permanent solutions in both. And he's made a lot of progress. But other places, India and Pakistan. Last exit question. Senator Cruz, I think I know your answer. I don't think there's going to be one Republican that criticizes you for coming on this program with Senator Fetterman. Senator Fetterman, I'm not really so sure that there won't be some Democrats that don't like the fact that you had a civil conversation about keeping our nation safe with Ted Cruz on this show. Am I wrong?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely, I consider Senator Cruz a friend as well now too. And no, I also want to, just point out what he said. I believe I was the only Democrat that was actually calling for and fully supported bombing the Iranian nuclear facility as well now too. I mean, now it's like absolutely that was the appropriate thing. How could we allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon? Now, imagine what that region would be like if Iran was able to acquire that weapon now. And that's why, as a Democrat, I was proud to stand with Israel through that. I mean, I know I can read a poll, and 8% of the Democrats support the kinds of military actions in Gaza. 8%. Well, I am part of that 8% because Israel is in a war for civilization, and I was proud to stand with Israel through that war. And now we have possible to have real peace in that region. Now, I don't care if it comes from a Republican administration or Democrat one. We have to call it what it is and celebrate that and acknowledging it that, it was entirely appropriate to back Israel through this.
Yeah.
And that should
Senator, Senator Cruz, I don't even think Lindsey Graham will get mad at you. I'm just guessing. I'm just off the top of my head.
Look, to a person, I think Republicans really admire the courage John has shown. You may recall when John decided to go to Mar-a-Lago and meet with President Trump, and he got a lot of criticism in his own party, and he was asked by reporters, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I want him to name me the Pope of Greenland," which I thought was hysterical. And so I tweeted out an AI photo of John Fetterman as the Pope of Greenland, which still makes me laugh to this day.
Well, thank you both. You know what? We probably need more moments like this. I appreciate both of you. Thank you for being here. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.